Let's talk to Dr. Mike Jones, Executive Director of Migration Watch UK, to see what he makes of the Labour announcement today. Mike, a very good morning to you.
Morning to you too, Mike.
It seems incredible to me that Keir Starmer is effectively saying if he wanted to cure the shoplifting problem, he would just say to shoplifters, just come into the shop, take what you want and leave, and nobody's going to bother you. That's his answer for immigration.
Well, yeah, we were told previously that the Labour Party wanted a returns policy with the EU.
Yeah.
But this isn't a returns policy. It's essentially an exchange programme. It's like the Erasmus scheme, but for illegal economic migrants.
Right.
And it's going to create perverse incentives. So if you're an irregular migrant coming into the EU, the worst case scenario, or, well, the best case scenario is you get sent to the UK. If you're an irregular migrant coming into the UK, then the worst case scenario is you get sent back to the EU. It will just increase the pull factor. There'll be more migration. Ultimately, the Labour Party needed a policy of detain and deport. They needed to support the government on the Rwanda policy, but they've completely backtracked on this, and it's totally counterproductive what they're suggesting.
Yeah, it really is. Because the idea that somehow this will stop people coming illegally because 120,000 will be allowed in legally, if anything, it'll probably triple the number that want to come because they'll know that there is actual kind of, passage that is available to come here legally. So they'll say, well, what's the difference if we come here illegally? They'll probably give us status anyway.
Yes. If you look at sort of refugee flows in the real world, they tend to be a mixed multitude. You've got women, children, young men, middle-aged men, older people, because when people are fleeing a conflict, they travel with their extended families. But what we're seeing across the channel is predominantly young men. These are overwhelmingly illegal economic migrants. I'm sure there are some exceptions, but Keir Starmer's proposals to essentially exchange a handful of these people for a handful of illegal migrants in the EU is not going to stop this. Ultimately, you've got to break the people traffickers' business model. You do that by attacking the supply side, and both the Conservative and Labour Party are singing from the same hymn sheet on this. But you also need to tackle demand, and you need to make it economically irrational for people to pay people traffickers the money to get here. And at this moment in time, the Rwanda plan is the only game in town. Obviously, that's going to come down to a judgment by the Supreme Court. But for the Labour Party to just completely dismiss this is absurd.
It really is ridiculous, particularly now when we look at what's happening over the course of the rest of Europe, because, as I said, Lampedusa now is literally under siege. Thousands and thousands of people coming, mostly men, from what we can see of the footage that we're looking at, arriving daily by the thousands. I think there was something like 100 and odd boats that came because it's the closest point to North Africa. The people who get there then decide that they are in Europe for better or worse. They can then move on from there to mainland Italy. The French, apparently, have started to bulk up their border with Italy because they don't want any of these people coming in to France. Well, that's a bit ironic, given that they won't bulk up their own border in western France, in Calais, to stop the people there from leaving.
Yeah, of course. Frontex, which is, the organisation that protects Europe's external borders, is a great idea. I support it, but they clearly haven't given it enough resources. And they haven't scaled it up properly. But it is obviously very ironic that the French are now tightening their borders with Italy, but they're essentially chaperoning dinghies to the midpoint in the English Channel. It does beg a belief. Obviously, the ideal outcome of this is we do have a bilateral agreement with the French, where we have joint patrols, joint operations, so we can actually take these people back. And that would destroy the people traffickers' business model. Right. But the French are completely against this.
Well, this is the point that Keir Starmer's making. He's saying that he will get that sort of deal back up and running so that we can return people to the European Union. But I don't see how he's going to manage that, and he doesn't seem to tell us either.
Well, he can't get a returns policy. The EU have completely ruled it out. As you said, Mike, they don't have their own house in order. The EU do actually have returns policies with Turkey and Tunisia. Turkey only southeastern border, Tunisia in the central Med, but they're the ones who are returning the people. They don't want to deal with the UK because France would become a receiving state. The only way Keir Starmer is going to get around this is if he has this quota system.
Right.
But again, that's not a returns policy. It's an exchange program.
Yeah.
It's like Erasmus, but for illegal economic migrants.
Oh, quite. I mean, he also said basically that, this would save the country loads of money because we wouldn't be any longer putting illegal migrants up in hotels and feeding them and giving them money to spend. Well, I don't see how that works either, because just by allowing people to come in, who knows where they're going to go, what they're going to do. I mean, they're not immediately going to get off the boat in Dover and suddenly find themselves a job, are they?
Well, no, I mean, ultimately, this comes back to a debate about population growth. I mean, obviously, as you increase the population, some of those people are going to be very skilled, specialized in a particular sector, and that's great for the economy, but they're very much a minority. Population growth imposes a vast burden on public infrastructure, on health, on education. It creates diseconomies of congestion. And it damages productivity as well, because we're constantly having to create new infrastructure for these people rather than investing in new stuff for the existing population. So there's an opportunity cost there as well. So, long term, this isn't going to save the British taxpayer money.
No. But also, when we look into, again, the European model, the EU resettlement plan is literally falling apart at the seams, because in addition to France trying to stop people coming in from Italy, the Germans have now said they will not accept any more migrants from Italy under the Dublin Agreement, basically. They've suspended the Dublin Agreement. So, I mean, I said this to Isabel Oakeshott earlier, and I don't know what the answer is, but is there potentially some kind of international barrier that can be set up between basically Europe and the rest of the Mediterranean?
I mean, ultimately, this comes down to a combination of bilateral agreements. Again, the EU has an agreement in place with Turkey and Tunisia, but they also need to scale up Frontex. That's essentially the key to this.
And what would that do?
Well, you essentially apprehend people, you detain, you deport. It's pretty much that straightforward.
Right. I mean, it seems to me that what we need to do here is to stop the migrants from coming to Europe, period, because there isn't room in many European countries. Obviously, Germany has said it, France has said it, we're saying it. I dare say there will be other countries. Sweden has certainly started deporting an awful lot of people who got into their country. Denmark the same. There must be surely some kind of policy that has to be made by the Europeans in general to stop it. Otherwise, people are just going to keep coming, because if you're living in North Africa or in any part of the African continent and you decide you want to go and live somewhere better because you can, well, there's never going to be any reason to stop trying.
Well, I mean, ultimately, the European Union has to make a decision. Is it a globalist organization, or is it continentalist?
Yeah.
Is the EU there to benefit European citizens, or does it want this, sort of great humanitarian commitment where it's taking on people from the rest of the world? Yeah. That's a decision that the Commission has to make. I mean, the UK is now out of the EU, so that's not our problem. But there are going to be considerable tensions there.
Well, the problem for me now is that whenever all of these humanitarian agreements were drawn up, they didn't have this problem. They didn't have the mass migration which is currently going on. There was always a bit of it, but even going as far back as to the Blair regime in this country, yes, they were able to deport many more migrants than we are deporting at the moment, 50, 60,000 a year, but there weren't that many coming. Whereas now, you've got hundreds of thousands, probably millions coming into Europe over the course of a couple of years, and there's just nowhere for them to go.
Yeah, I mean, the UN Convention on Refugees, the Geneva Convention, that was designed in a very different time.
I mean, that is ancient, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It was designed essentially for Eastern European migrants who may be escaping Soviet totalitarianism behind the Iron Wall. But obviously, we live in a very different world. The Cold War has come to an end. And due to changes in technology, aviation, shipping, various other technological developments, including communications, it's much easier for people to move And yes, some of these people are refugees, but there's a huge cohort there who are.
Yeah, but there's nothing particularly new, Mike, though, about the method that is being currently used to get to Lampedusa. They're getting on rickety boats, which can maybe house as many as 50 to 60 to 100 people on each boat. You know, that's not particularly revolutionary transportation, is it? They could have been doing that 30 or 40 years ago, but they weren't. So there's something else going on that is causing these people to want to move. I presume it might be that they can learn more about where they're going, and it might be that communications are telling them that they can get here and they can have a better life. I don't know whether it's that, but I mean, there's nothing in the manner of their movement which should suggest that they couldn't have done this 20 or 30 years ago, but they're now doing it in mass numbers, and I think that's what we've got to find out about.
Oh yeah, but you know, people have more money. I mean, even in underdeveloped countries, people do have the wherewithal to pay human traffickers, and supply chains have become more sophisticated as well.
Right.
You know, many of these boat parts are produced in Turkey, for example.
Yeah.
But the state hasn't really responded to this in accordance with how technology has changed.
Right. Well, you know the boats are being made in Turkey. You know that the boat business is a very lucrative one. We probably have people who understand who the human traffickers are, where they're operating. You know, why isn't anybody stopping it?
Well, we've recently established the deal with Turkey. We're going to have, you know, an academy there in Istanbul, and we're cooperating on intelligence, and I think that's a great thing.
But how about you blow up the place where they're making the boats or something? I mean, you know, it's all very well having an academy, but you know what I'm saying? This is a desperate situation. There's no point sitting around a table going, oh, we must do something about this. Something's going on. I'm not blaming you. I'm just basically saying, look, we've got to do something to physically stop it.
The problem is you'd be violating Turkish national sovereignty if you did that. I mean, you can't just put, you know, SAS or SBS people in there to blow up factories. I mean, that would create a diplomatic crisis.
Yeah. Well, how about they do it then? I mean, you know, are either aiding and abetting criminal activity or they're not.
I mean, the Turkish government hate people traffickers.
So why don't they stop it?
They just don't have the expertise that we do in terms of detecting these places. And by working closely with us, with the UK border agency, they may be in a position to actually disrupt these places.
Yeah. I mean, it reminds me of that scene in The Untouchables. Everybody knows where the booze is. It's just a matter of breaking down the door and stopping them from making it. You know, I know that might sound a bit fanciful, but in the end, that's what is going to have to happen. And whether it takes a year or 10 years, too much damage will be done by then.
Significant damage will be done. You know, again, attacking the supply chains is a great idea. I completely support it. You know, we saw in New York with, you know, the RICO program, they managed to clamp down on the, you know, sort of Italian mafia.
Yes.
So law enforcement agencies do adapt to.
But
you know,
Pete, the trouble with this particular problem, it seems to me, Mike, and we're running out of time here, so I'm going to be quick, is that people ignored it for so long. They didn't think it was important. The governments of Western Europe thought, well, it's only a small number, we can handle it, nobody really cares. And now look what's happened. It's the biggest problem every government in every country in Europe has got.
Well, there's a short-termism. There's an interesting phrase in politics, NIMT, not in my term in office.
Yeah.
You know, we haven't just seen this with immigration policy, we've seen it with nuclear power, housing, industrial strategy, and so on. But this is just another classic example. Politicians looking at the news cycle rather than looking at the long-term consequences.
Well, they better start looking over their shoulder as they're going to be out of a job. Thank you very much indeed. Dr. Mike Jones, Executive Director of Migration Watch UK.